Well, hello, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. My name's Dan Bloom. I'm the Mirror's online political editor, and I'm here to talk through some of the many things that have happened this week. So, unfortunately for you, this is the third time I'm here in a Facebook Live this week, and for good reason, because on Monday, we had the announcement about what the rules would be for all the different tiers in England, which begin next Wednesday. And then we had an announcement on Christmas and what would happen over this sort of 5-day truce where you can form a bubble with your friends and family, but probably one or the other. And today we've had the announcement of where each area of England is in each tier. So now we can piece all those things together and try to give some advice about this huge range of government rules, which I appreciate are very difficult to understand this week. So the sort of story from today is the sheer number of people in tiers 2 and 3. Now, don't forget, if you're in tier 2 or tier 3, you cannot have an indoor gathering with friends, with family, anywhere indoors, unless they're already in your household or bubble. That means you can't go to a pub together, you can't go to each other's private homes, and so on. And 99% of England is going to be in either tier 2 or tier 3 from next week. And the other big problem is places like pubs and restaurants. So the new tiers are stricter than the old tiers. And tier 3 in particular will make pubs and restaurants and all hospitality venues shut down completely. They can only do takeaway unless they can operate, shut down completely. And sort of 41% of the country, I think it is going to be in that category. So this is a huge blow to a lot of people who work in hospitality who are going to have to keep relying on furlough. So I'm going to answer as many questions as I can. And I can see they're already rolling in, and I'll go on for about 20 minutes. But I just want to warn you that this is not official advice. It's not government advice. This is because I'm here. It's my advice, having read the rules, and we write a lot about this stuff. And if there's any uncertainty, do go and check the government website as well. So we'll start with Charlotte, who says, if I own a bridal store in tier 3, am I allowed to open? Charlotte, you've put me on the spot straight away, but I believe shops are all allowed to open in all tiers. The problem that you have is if it's an entertainment venue, indoor entertainment it's called, that's places like bowling alleys and cinemas. They're not allowed to open in tier 3, but I'm, let's say 99% sure that a bridal store can open in tier 3. Becky Shepherd asks, why isn't London in tier 3? Now, this is a good question. London, of course, is in tier 2, and a lot of other places, 21, 22 million people, are going to be in tier 3. And the complaint from a lot of places in the north already, the mayor of, I think it's Hartlepool, has come out with this, is that London's being given preferential treatment. Now, the government insists that it has looked at certain criteria when coming up with the tiers. So there are 5 categories of things they look at. It's things like case detection rates, how the over 60s are doing, the pressure on the NHS, and how cases are rising or falling. But despite that, you've got a bit of discrepancy. So the best I can do is say what the government's saying about London. They're saying that the trajectory, the direction of travel had been increasing, but only until recently, and the situation's not uniform. So some places have admissions falling and all that sort of thing. And they say, taken as a whole, the situation has stabilised in London, and therefore they don't need the worst rate. But I'm not sure that's going to stop a lot of people thinking that it is unfair. Let's switch to Christmas. Tina Brown asks, is midnight mass on? Yes, I believe so. Places of worship are allowed to stay open. And once you form a Christmas bubble, so with up to 2 other households, your bubble is allowed to go to a place of worship. There's only actually 3 places you're allowed to go. You can go to an outdoor space like a park, you can go to each other's houses, and you can go to a place of worship. So they have specifically made this exemption for you to be able to go to midnight mass with your family. but you have to socially distance from other people in the church. Just having a look at Chris's question. 3 families up to 8. Does that include children? Chris, I may be misunderstanding, but I'm not sure where you've got the 8 from. The Christmas bubble rules, if this is what we're talking about, is 3 households of any number of people can join together. And if you are in a support bubble already, so your 2 households join together in a sort of special way, you count as 1 household for the purposes of Christmas. So if you're in a support bubble with someone, you and your support bubble and 2 other households can get together in this special Christmas bubble for Christmas. And it doesn't matter how many of you there are. So it doesn't matter if there's more than 8 of you. It doesn't matter how many of them are children. You can do that. Zoe Spur asks, can Tier 3 travel? Because we've got to have tests before we travel and isolate when we come back. I'm not sure quite what you mean by this question, Zoe, whether it's overseas travel or travel within the UK, within England, I should say, because it's slightly different. But if you're talking about abroad, it's a little bit tricky. And the reason I say that is because if you're in Tier 3, you are not meant to be traveling in or out of the Tier 3 area. That's the government guidance. And you shouldn't be staying overnight away from Tier 3. So really, you shouldn't be traveling. However, that is not a legal barrier. It is guidance. So confusingly enough, you're not supposed to be traveling outside Tier 3 or staying overnight. That includes going abroad. But there is no legal limit on you doing that. It's guidance. So the police can't fine you for doing it, and it's not illegal to leave the country. I hope that makes sense. Victoria says, so how many are allowed for Christmas? Well, it just shows that the government is claiming to try and make this simple, but every single piece of guidance they've done has thrown up 20 more questions. Victoria, the rule is a hard and fast 3 households and an unlimited number of people within those households. The important thing is that this is called a Christmas bubble, and that bubble is meant to be exclusive and fixed for the 5 days. I think it's December the 23rd to the 27th of Christmas. So once you form that bubble, you are not meant to break it up, and you're not meant to sort of interchange with another bubble. But you can get together, even break social distancing together, hug and kiss, and share a Christmas lunch together. So it's not a number of people, it's a number of households. Julie Charlton asks a very good question, which is, if we're in Tier 3, what does that mean for the extremely vulnerable? Now, this is a reference to people who were shielding. More than 2 million people in March were not leaving their house at all, even to go for a walk without meeting anyone else. Those rules have been sort of relaxed as time has gone on. And at the moment, people in Tier 3 are not being told to shield again, even if they shielded before. Now, that's controversial with a lot of people because it means that some of the help that came with shielding last time, like food parcels and that sort of thing, are not available this time. And it's quite controversial, and people are also worried about what it means for their health, because people who are shielding are very, some of them have some quite serious medical conditions. The advice during the national lockdown for previous shielders was, you can go out, but don't go to the shops, don't go to work. People who were shielding have now been told, well, you can go to the shops and you can go to work, but be extra careful. And I think there's some more government guidance coming this week. Kelly Wood asks another difficult question. Thanks, Kelly. She asks, what about a cafe? So in Tier 1, a cafe can stay open. In Tier 2, a cafe can stay open, as long as they're not a bar. So some cafes sort of operate as a bar and just sell booze. You're not allowed to just sell alcohol. You have to sell a substantial meal. So if you're having, a lunchtime sandwich with sort of chips on the side or what have you, and a coffee, that should count as a main meal in the context of that cafe, and you should be able to stay open. Unfortunately, in Tier 3, cafes have to shut because they count as hospitality. So that's where these things get really tough. Amina asks a very good question. Oh, you guys are really good at these. If you're in tier 3, you can break the rules for 5 days. How does that keep people safe? Good point. The Christmas bubble rules are the same no matter what tier you're going into next week. They will all effectively be suspended, and you can go and see people for that period who you wouldn't usually be able to see. The short answer is it doesn't keep people completely safe. The government has openly said that this will increase the risk of coronavirus transmitting, but it's a balanced decision that they have taken in order for people to have some kind of Christmas with their family after a difficult year. What they also say is that you should exercise your own judgment about whether it's safe to see people, and that you should not socialize unnecessarily, not that we really can, under the rules, for 2 weeks before and 2 weeks after Christmas. So it's really tricky. You know, the government is saying, well, you're allowed to do this, but maybe you should think about not doing it. They're kind of placing the burden on individual people. Rosemary says, why are schools not shut? Well, the answer is partly that some of them sort of are in all but name. Most schools are open, but attendance has plummeted the last couple of weeks. I think almost sort of more than 3/4 of schools have at least sort of one outbreak or one student with COVID, and a lot of them have a very large number of students who are off at the moment. But the short answer to your question, Rosemary, is because children's education was affected so badly in the first lockdown, and it prompted a lot of fears about how the poorest children who have less support at home, or whose parents are trying to work in a minimum wage job and or have a single parent, that sort of thing, were slipping further behind in the school system than they already are. And that it was very damaging for children, and especially for, you know, children who are more vulnerable, like children in care and the children with special educational needs and that kind of thing. So the government has made this political decision that it's the last resort to shut schools, because the damage of not being in school, it's different to COVID, but it's bad in itself. Pauline says, can I go to Somerset? They're in tier 2 for Christmas. Well, the answer, Pauline, is you can't. It depends on what tier you're in, because if you're in tier 2, you can travel between areas, but you can't gather indoors, because, I mean, means that you can't really do much at all, doesn't it? Because why would you go and see someone in December across the country only to not be able to go to the pub or their house? What you can do is go to their garden and so on. I think what you mean is, can you go to Somerset over Christmas for the 5 days, the 23rd to the 27th? And the answer to that is yes, you can, because no matter what tier you're in, you will be able to travel across borders and across tiers and into Scotland and Wales to go and see people who you formed that Christmas bubble with for those 5 days. T. MT Brads asked, are gyms going to be open in tier 3? And I'm going to double check this one because Tory ministers kept getting it wrong, and I don't want to follow a bad example. But I do believe that they are open. They're open in tier 3 and tier 2 and tier 1, as are swimming pools, hairdressers, personal care, and so on. And this is a bit different to some gyms before under tier 3. So Blake asks, do you think we will end up in lockdown after Christmas? Short answer is yes, because look at what's happening next week. We're in some form of lockdown now, and that will continue. So 99% of the country are banned from meeting anyone they don't live with anywhere indoors. If the question is, will we end up in a national lockdown, then it's a bit trickier, because if this current lockdown is strict enough, we won't need it. But of course, the government has ruled nothing out. And therefore, as journalists covering the government, we're not really able to rule it out either. Louise asks a very, very good question. Can hospitality open in the 5 days of Christmas? No. they can't. So this was something that they talked about between the four nations and when they were coming up with the Christmas plan. And it was decided that they wouldn't change the tier rules as they apply to hospitality that has to shut. So for the 20 odd million people in tier 3, all those hotels, cafes, pubs, restaurants, those are all shut and they're not going to reopen for Christmas. It's worth saying as well, even if you're in a place where they are open, you're not allowed to go to the pub with your Christmas bubble. You can only go inside a private house or to a place of worship or to the park. Stacey says, I work in New Look. Will we be open in tier 3? New Look being a clothes shop, it will be open. All non-essential shops are open. The places that are closed in tier 3, I should really get the list up in front of me, shouldn't I? Are places like cinemas, bowling, bingo, soft play, indoor entertainment. But non-essential shops, like clothes shops, are still open in tier 3. So enjoy going back to work next week, Stacey. Sarah Lee asks another very good question. When will the tiers be reviewed? As far as we've been told, they're stuck for 2 weeks from the 2nd of December. So that takes us up to about the 16th. And then on the 16th, they'll be reviewed for the first time. And then after that, they'll be reviewed sort of weekly. So what we're currently expecting is that every Thursday, there will be a new sort of data dump of statistics of how the virus is going in different areas of the country. And we'll get an announcement all in one go, we hope, of which way different areas are going, whether they're going up or down. Karina says, when do you think we'll be out of these restrictions? I wish I could tell you, because I've been wanting to go on a big holiday for more than a year now, and it's not happened. But if I were to guess, I would say things start to look up around spring, around sort of Easter, and that's the point that ministers are looking at as well. So the tiers we've got now last until the end of March, and then they have to come up with a new system or extend it. Coupled with that, you've got the fact that spring, the virus transmits less easily anyway in spring. And of course, we've got some progress on a vaccine. Hopefully a lot of people will be vaccinated. But it's not the case that they're going to stop these restrictions as soon as a vaccine starts being given out, because you need a lot of people to be vaccinated before you start to get what's called herd immunity. So Angela Starkey says, can I go home to Wales from England to see my family? Before Christmas, I'm not sure, Angela, because it would depend what tier you're in England. What tier you're in England. And in Christmas, you can, as long as you form that Christmas bubble together. So from the 23rd to the 27th, 3 households, whether they're in Wales, England, Scotland, can join together in a Christmas bubble, and you can all gather in one house. And in fact, you could even travel between each other's houses during that period. Steve Richards says, if hospitality can't open over Christmas, will football fans still be allowed to go to matches? The answer is yes or no. It depends on which tier you're in. So one of the slightly unexpected things was that they did restart spectator sports like Premier League football and that kind of thing. So it's allowed in tier 1 or tier 2, but with different crowd sizes in those 2 tiers. So it's a bigger crowd in tier 1 and only 2,000 people, I think, for a whole stadium in tier 2. In tier 3, it's not allowed. So there we go. Janice has a problem that I wish I had. Hats off to you, Janice. Can we visit our second homes from tier 2 to tier 2? Yes, I am just sort of checking that as I say it, but yes, you are allowed to travel outside tier 2 and have an overnight stay. It's tier 3 that is the problem. Now, of course, in tier 2, you can't visit a second home with anyone you don't live with, but as long as it's your second home or it's a timeshare or what have you, and it's just you and your household there, or your support bubble, that's fine. Caroline Page asks, will hairdressers be open? Yes, And as you can see, I kind of could do with going there after a month in lockdown. Yeah, they'll be open. They'll be open in all 3 tiers. This was a big thing that the industry lobbied for, and they managed to get. So I'm going to have to read this one from Amy. It's difficult, and I'm told this epic one is the last question. So Amy, this comes back to something I was saying a few minutes ago. I don't know if you were here at that point. That basically, if you're in tier 3, you are not meant to travel outside your area or stay overnight. However, that is guidance and not a legal ban. And that when Grant Shapps was saying you're still allowed to fly, that's what he was talking about. Is at the moment, in the national lockdown, you're not allowed to leave your house by law without a reasonable excuse, and that excuse doesn't include going on holiday. So long and short of it is right now, you're legally banned from going on holiday. Under the new system, no one is legally banned from catching a flight abroad and going on holiday. You might have to quarantine when you get back, but that's your problem when you get back and you have to look it up. But for Amy's situation, even though you're legally allowed to go, the guidance says you shouldn't go on December the 20th. Because in tier 3, you're not supposed to go away from the area or stay overnight away from the area. Once again, it's guidance, but it's not the law, so you can't be fined by the police for doing it. It's difficult to explain, but it makes some degree of sense, I hope. Fortunately, I'm not the one making the rules. I'm just the one desperately trying to explain them. I know that probably only covered a tiny fraction of the questions, and I'm sure you have far, far more, but I hope it was useful, and I hope, no doubt I'll be talking to you again, but you all have a Merry Christmas and you enjoy at least being able to go to the shops if you want to and if you feel safe once the lockdown ends next week. So thank you, and we'll see you next time.